Well, let's catch up on the weather situation as we near the end of September. The equinox happened over the weekend. We are fully into fall. Let's talk about things as harvest rolls along and more. Joining us for a conversation, Eric Snodgrass with Nutrient Ag Solutions is with us. Eric, good to talk with you again. Hope you had a great weekend.
Yeah, I did. It was, finally got some rain in parts of the Midwest, which was desperately needed. I think the rains were underwhelming for a lot of folks. I think the models tend to over forecast rain in falls when it's been very dry. So this is another fall where we had some extremely dry conditions leading into this event that started in California actually, and got its way through the Midwest. And still, there's more rain coming through parts of Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio today. But I think overall the totals are still a bit light over what's needed. I mean, I was at an event all day Sunday and it rained for most of the day, and we were still driving cars over a grassy lot for parking, and there was no no mud to be found. So
Mm.
this is a problem. And I got contacted by a guy in Nebraska who was expecting more rain out of this. He goes, Eric, if I don't get another 2 to 3 inches, I don't know how I'm going to do my fall application, my fall field work. It's just too dry. And I said, I get it. This is going to be an ongoing issue until we really get a break in this moisture. So yeah, weekend was interesting with that precip, but we certainly got a lot more to talk about going forward.
Well, I know that drought monitor has just continued to expand in many parts of the country. And, coupled with that, the Mississippi River, low water level issues there again. I think that's top of mind, kind of tied in with all of this dryness and lack of rainfall that we've been seeing here recently, Eric.
Yeah, and I mean, drought area in the United States since June has tripled. So, the places that are in D1 to D4, that's tripled since June. It all happened late. Had it happened in July and August, we would be talking about a much different story with crop size. But the tail end of this did get dry pretty quickly. So I'm curious what that's going to do to yields as well. But you're right, the Missouri Basin, Mississippi Basin, Ohio Basin, all very low on water in the soil, which means the river levels are low. And the Mississippi this morning at Memphis was 10 feet below low stage, which is exactly where it was a year ago. But there's one big wild card this year that we didn't have a year ago, and that is the potential for a tropical system to come up out of the Caribbean into the Gulf by midweek, be somewhere along maybe the Mississippi, Alabama, Florida coast. I think it's more toward the Florida Panhandle. And it's likely going to go straight north, interact with a little trough that's going to come into Iowa and Illinois and sit and spin there, which means your neck of the woods could get quite a bit of rainfall out of this. Kind of like what we saw from Francine, but different, entirely different system, but came up the Mississippi and turned. Well, this one's going to come up the Mississippi, maybe go more toward Ohio rather than Alabama when it's kind of reached a stalling point. Rainfall totals could be high. The intensity of the system could be high. I'm saying this is the one that we could be worried about for hitting the Florida coastline there, or maybe near Mobile, Alabama. Some models, this is just a couple of models, have taken it up to Cat 4. I want to be very careful when I say that. I'm not trying to spark fear, but I just want folks to know that the potential is there for this one to be stronger. So we just need to take it seriously and watch the forecasts. By the way, it's not even yet formed. So this is still, the National Hurricane Center is giving it a 90% chance of developing as we talk here early Monday morning. But we'll probably quickly see it intensify and get that name Helene and get going. So I'm concerned about it. It's something I'll be watching very closely all week and where the moisture goes. But I'll tell you something, if you're not in the Mississippi Valley, the southeast parts of the Ohio Valley, you're not going to get anything. The next 7 to 10 days is very dry. So the Western Corn Belt is going to continue to get drier. The Northwest is going to get drier as well, Northwestern Corn Belt. And I do, kind of all in the same breath here, follow this all up with the risk of like an early October frost. I think some we're going to be talking about in the Corn Belt. There's a system that some of the models are predicting coming around second, third, fourth of the month, probably the third and fourth, those early morning hours, parts of Wisconsin, big chunk of Minnesota. Probably parts of Michigan, and then maybe parts of Illinois and Iowa could get their first, 32-degree reading. And that's not uncommon. That's about a week ahead of time for some folks, but right on time for others. So we'll just need to watch that carefully.
Well, I think about the heat and dryness we've seen in the Western Belt, the Northwestern Belt, up into the Northern Plains. That, if anything, that's maybe helped some crops that were behind get to maturity more quickly. But then again, maybe that's not necessarily the best thing either, with some of that rapid late development. It's kind of a catch-22 to some degree, but it's maybe helped a little bit with all this dryness and allowed for some harvest activity to really get rolling, Eric.
Yeah, it has, but at the same time, I would have rather had with that heat a little bit of more water. I mean, that would have helped
Yeah.
the crop tremendously, and it was quite dry. You talk about the changes in temperature. We had a frost advisory out for the western side of the Dakotas over the weekend. I expect them to be back up in the 90s at some point this week. So the temperatures being so wildly fluctuating, that's not easy on a crop, late in the season. It's just you're just outside of the normal range as expected. So the crop is physiologically adjusting to that as it gets here toward the end of its life cycle and
Yeah.
works its way past maturity so we can harvest it. So thing I'm concerned about is there's too much dry air out there. And even though we got this tropical system coming through, what I don't like seeing is that dry air and not much being forecast in terms of precip outside of the tropical system. We're now talking about the risk of fires. We're talking about the risk of some of that late season weight not getting put on. And all those things just at the end of the day start to chip away at what was supposed to be a huge, huge crop. So I think there's still room for this thing to change as we work our way into autumn.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Let's talk South America. That's something that we've been watching here now for several weeks, and you and I have been discussing it. And you look at Brazil in particular, a lot of the talk about how dry it is down there, et cetera, but it's still early. So I guess, Eric, are we pushing the panic button quite yet in terms of their weather situation or not?
Not yet. And I mean, last year I learned to kind of throw the panic button away. I mean, it was the driest October, November, December on record. It rained in January and they had a huge crop. So I'm sitting here going, okay, well, what is a panic anymore? It's really kind of bothersome to understand that you see that much weather stress and we don't get, you don't get the yield response for them. So what's going on? We're in early September planting progress. So the last numbers came out on the 20th. They're at 0.27% planted. What's average? Like 1%. I'm talking about Mato Grosso. It's been very wet in southern Brazil, which they've had an extremely wet spring. There's going to be problems down there with just being too wet in spring. But the monsoon hasn't started yet, and we just typically don't expect the monsoon until you get into October anyway, when about 80% of the beans are planted. I think the front half of October is drier. I don't think it comes on super wet early. So they may have a slower pace early October, but they might make up for that very quickly when they see the rain in the forecast or when the rain starts falling. And while some of the models have trended a little drier, the European this morning was drier than it had been in October in a long time. I still don't see, I don't see anything crazy that says press the panic button. And here's why. Brazil is dry. So if you look at the moisture profile above Brazil, it's very low. But where does the moisture come from when the monsoon starts? It comes from the Atlantic and the Amazon River. And then the Atlantic, where the flow is going to come from, it's not. There's moisture there, which means when the monsoonal circulation gets going, it'll tap into the moisture and start raining. It's just going to have to overcome a deficit to get started, which is why I'm thinking it's going to be the second half of October that brings in rain if the rains are going to come in on time. Now, if we're wrong and the models are wrong and the analysis is wrong, yeah, there might be a story out there. But I just don't know, Jesse, if it's enough to offset all of the bearish news, right? Is a late plan in Brazil enough to turn this thing around? And I think that's what we're going to have to watch for as we go forward. But certainly right now, man, I looked at some satellite data yesterday. Very smoky, a lot of wildfire smoke spreading across Brazil right now. And that's just an indication of how dry things are there.
Eric, good stuff. Anything final you'd want to share with us you're watching around the world this week?
Yeah, you're going to hear a lot more about La Nina as we go forward. I mean, you and I have been talking about it for what feels like 8 months, but La Nina, the ocean temperatures in the equatorial Pacific did drop down to 1 degree C below average. So that's full La Nina territory. But remember, at any given time, La Nina can contribute up to like a third of the pattern, right? We can look at it and say, wow, it's doing this, and that's why we often focus on it as meteorologists. Overall, if we get more of a La Nina-like winter across North America, it's a good thing for a lot of the Corn Belt. It's not good for the Cotton Belt. I don't like it for the Cotton Belt. It tends to be much drier for the Cotton Belt, and that's not something that they want to see given the drought pressure that has been in parts of the Cotton Belt this summer. Now, we had a hurricane come through. We got another one coming through. We had Debbie that hit the southeast. But, I'm just sitting here thinking about what it would look like going into a spring, relying heavily on spring rainfall to recover low soil moisture in all the river systems, and then drier conditions across the south if La Nina does come through like it might. But if you're in the northern tier of the U.S., it tends to be cold, snowy, tend to have a legit winter if La Nina dominates, but that's a big if. There's a lot of subseasonal things that can step in the way, and that's what makes seasonal prediction hard. So keep an eye on La Nina, or I'll keep an eye on it. We'll keep talking about it every Monday.
Absolutely. ag-wx.com, agweather.com for more info, and sign up for Eric's weekly weather newsletter there as well. Eric Snodgrass with Nutrien Ag Solutions. Thanks for joining us. Have a great week. We'll talk to you next week.
Yeah, sounds good, Jesse.